Welcome back to Off Ball Takes. This is your host, Yarby Laws, and this is my co-host,
Christopher Wells.
We appreciate all the support on our recent content. And before we do get started, please don't forget to like and subscribe and follow us on Instagram and TikTok at the OBT Podcast for more content and updates.
Yes, we're back at it again with another episode. And for today, we're going to do some award predictions. So we'll start off with the normal award. We'll start off with MVP, right? Most Valuable Player, the Michael Jordan Trophy. If you didn't remember, they actually do name the awards after the players. This one I feel like is mostly cut and dry, right? I would say that right now, my early pick for MVP is going to be Nikola Jokic of the Denver Nuggets. And for the simple reason that the Nuggets got better, they've added more depth. The roster's going to be better. I think the record is going to be a lot better. I think they're going to be closer to the top of the West. They're not going to have the number one record, but I think this season, unlike last year, right, where they kind of held on, right, to get that 4 spot, I think it'll be a lot easier to hold on this time around. Jokic will still put up his normal video game numbers, and I think the narrative is probably also going to be on his side as well, right? Because last year, right, SJ won the MVP. He was both of our picks for MVP. I don't think it was going into the season, but like say for the final stretch, right? Like we were like, yeah, he's our MVP. And there was a feeling from a lot of people that like, yeah, Jokic could have or should have won the award, right? Because his numbers were also insane as well, yeah, right? He averaged 30, 13, and 10, right? Just ridiculous. And so I think this year, right, as long as the Nuggets, win games and they're closer to the top of the West, right, I think it's his to lose. And I think that's what's going to happen, right? Just because, I'm higher on this Nuggets roster than last year's. I don't think either of us were super high on the Nuggets to begin last year. So this one I feel like is a pretty easy one. Of course, SGA is going to have something to say about it as well, right? Because if you look at the betting odds, right, he's not favored at all, really, to win the award. And I guess, it's because of the fact that, back-to-back MVPs, it's really difficult to win that. I mean, Jokic has done it before. Giannis did it as well. But the other thing is that I think people just kind of assume that Oklahoma City, record-wise, is going to probably be a little bit worse than last year. The pathway for SGA to win it is if they win 70-plus games, right? If they win 70-plus games and they're even better than last year and his stats are still relatively similar to what they normally are, he could win it. Of course, you still have the other guys that are perennial favorites or perennial contenders to win it, right? Like you got Giannis, but the Bucks roster isn't that great. So his team would have to be really, really good record-wise in order for him to get it. Luka's always in this as well. I think he was my pick, I think, last year to win it, if I'm not mistaken, and that didn't work out because he was hurt and then he was traded. But the issue for him is it's going to have to probably be similar to the Nuggets case, right? Where like the Lakers would probably have to finish really high in the Western Conference. Like they'd probably have to be the 2 seed over Denver in order for him to have a chance. So I would say Jokic is my pick to win it. And I think he's the prohibitive favorite. But of course, there's always the case for others, right? Like Wemby's on that list as well. But the Spurs, I think, would have to be really, really good. They'd have to probably just be an outright playoff team. Then in the Eastern Conference, outside of Giannis, nobody else is really considered to be a favorite. There's a couple of sleepers. You could have, Ant-Man, right, for the Wolves. If the Wolves are really good, if they're better than last year. Of course, in the East, you could have Brunson, maybe Mitchell because Garland's out. But I'm going with Jokic.
Yeah, I'm going with Jokic as well. Pretty much same reasons as you, right? I think voter fatigue is real. That's why it's so hard to win, the MVP back-to-back, but he's done it before. And, coming off of last season, he arguably could have been the MVP last year as well. Definitely, a lot of people felt that way for sure. So I think, as long as he picks up from last year, which he will, obviously, I think he's going to run away with this one. Anthony Edwards would definitely be my sleeper pick as well. That's somebody I'm kind of looking at, for more progression and, can he take his game to a whole different level? We'll see. But I think as of right now, the way that team is constructed, they're pretty much dang near neck and neck with Oklahoma City. So I think it's only fair that he's the favorite.
Yeah. Like I said, of course, these can always change over the course of the season, but I think right now he's the early on, and that would be my pick.
Yeah.
Next up, Rookie of the Year. Feel like this one is kind of another one that's relatively cut and dry, but I think that there's going to be some real contenders for this one. But I think Cooper Flag is going to win Rookie of the Year, just in terms of, obviously he's in a different spot because he's on a team that's got more talent, where he's not necessarily the number one option or best player on it, but just his overall all around game. And I still believe he's going to put up good numbers anyways, right? So just what he's going to be able to contribute on both ends of the floor, rebounding, passing, still being able to score. I think he's going to win it. But like I said, there could be some other contenders, right? You have, say like an Ace Bailey, right? Because in Utah, obviously we've seen what he's done so far in the preseason, small sample size, right? But he could be prime to have some really big scoring nights. You got other guys like Con Knipple, of course, maybe Trey Johnson or one of these other guys, Dylan Harper. Maybe it's just he's coming off the bench. So I think that might be a little bit trickier. But I have Cooper Flag right now as the Rookie of the Year. But like I said, I could see somebody else challenging it, because I could see one of these other guys maybe having a bigger offensive role, and then maybe they put up the big numbers. But I think he's the favorite.
I'm glad you mentioned that last part, in terms of the offensive
Yeah.
part, because that's exactly what I'm going to do. I'm going to pick Trey Johnson. I think he's going to have the green light. Obviously, that's my team. A little bit biased here, but yeah, I think, his scoring prowess is going to be, off the charts entering the league. I'm expecting big things from him. He's got good vets around him. Like, honestly, if Dylan Harper was starting, then I'd probably pick him. But yeah, him coming off the bench is kind of a little bit of a question mark for me. Cooper Flag obviously should be the favorite just because of how well-rounded his game is. But I think if a guy like Trey Johnson, comes out of the gate firing and he's efficient, because that's what I think is going to probably get him that award, is if he puts up pretty big numbers for a rookie and it doesn't look like he's just, shot chucking. I think that's something that to keep an eye on, especially, if you're not really familiar with his game. But I'm going to pick Trey Johnson.
Yeah. Like you said, that's another good pick, because we know with Rookie of the Year, you don't have to be on a winning team, right? Like, it's possible Cooper Flag might be on, or Dylan Harper could be on the team that's got, like, the best record amongst rookies.
Mm-hmm.
But we know that it's a stats based award, right? By and large, it's not based off, and not that any of these awards are ultimately win, but like MVP, like you can't be on like a non-playoff team and win the
Right,
MVP
right.
award. But like for Rookie of the Year, it's usually pretty common that, like, yeah, you're the best rookie on a team that's not very good, because that's usually how it goes. There's always exceptions, but yeah, I think those are some good ones. Moving on, Defensive Player of the Year. This is another one that I feel like is relatively cut and dry. His to lose, Victor Wembanyama,
Yep.
assuming he's healthy. If he's healthy, I think he's going to win it. We know that this guy, when he's healthy, is a defensive force, defensive system into and onto himself. Last year, of course, he averaged 11 rebounds, 4 blocks a game, over a steal a game in only 46 games. So that's going to be the issue there. Can he make the 75 or 65 game limit? But if he does, and I think he will, right? I'm like, I don't, I knock on wood. I don't, hopefully he doesn't have any issues with blood clots or anything like that. But it's his to lose, just because we know how great he is defensively. When he's out there, the Spurs are one of the better defensive teams in the league. When he's off the floor, they're one of the worst, right? Which is kind of my point in terms of him being a defensive force into and onto himself. Like I said, being able to block shots, being able to use his length to slow down guys and deter shots. He can even block shots on the perimeter. He can do it all on that end of the floor. And we know he's going to have a big defensive ask for this team anyways, especially early on in the season, since they're probably going to be without a couple of guys. So as long as he's healthy, I think he's almost a lock to win it.
Yeah, I agree with you for sure. I don't really think there's anybody else that I kind of have my eye on for this award. Like, not to say, these guys aren't good, but like Evan Mobley, Gobert, great rim protectors, but nowhere near the realm of, what Wemby can do, especially if he does meet that 65 game mark. Because, like you said, I think he would have definitely ran away with that one last year if he hadn't have, been shut down for the remainder of the season, right? Like, he's such a great perimeter defender and interior defender, right? He gets steals, he gets blocks, and, just his presence alone kind of just changes the way that you kind of have to attack that team.
Yeah, exactly. And and that's the thing, is that the funny part is that for a number of these awards, right, it just kind of feels like that there's going to be some guys where it's just kind of an obvious pick, Where, like I said, as long as they're healthy, then that's probably what's going to happen. But this one I think might be a little bit of a trickier one because we don't necessarily know, you know, the like what some of these guys are going to be in terms of like where they are in the rotation.
Hmm.
For six man of the year, I'm gonna assume he's gonna come off the bench, and if he does, then I'm probably gonna still go with Peyton Pritchard because of the fact that like Tatum's out, so everybody's gonna have to step up offensively. He was really good last year. I don't really see his role off the bench changing. He might play more, right? Now, obviously, there's gonna be more attention on him, so maybe his stats might look worse. But I'm gonna go with him as the early favorite. They're gonna put up a lot of threes, and somebody's gonna have to score. So I'm gonna go with him. But I think this one is a trickier one.
Yeah, this one's a toss up for sure. There's multiple guys, and Peyton Pritchard would definitely be on the radar. But um, I'm kind of in between on two guys. I like Nas
Yeah,
Reed, but I also
yeah,
really like Caruso because it's like that guy is probably going to come off the bench and they're coming off the title. So, if he has a similar impact to last year, if not better, then I could see him running away with it. So I'm just going to go with Caruso on that one just because of what he provides on the defensive end and he can kind of just pop off for random, scoring nights as well.
yeah. I really like that pick just because, like he said, there's definitely a chance where, like now that we know, well, we already knew, but like just say,
Sure.
now in terms of like what we expect from Oklahoma City and like how important he is to that team, that could definitely be one of those. It's tough because usually for six man of the year, right? Like that's usually another stats scoring based award.
Yeah.
And Caruso is one of those guys where, you know, his stat line isn't always indicative of how he actually played.
Right.
But for some of these, like I said, it's tough because for some of these guys, I don't know if they're automatically locks to come off the bench. Like say, like DeAndre Hunter could be a guy that could be a really strong pick for six man of the year. But with the injuries that they have, they may just start him unless
Right.
they
Right.
put somebody else out there, right? Because like Max Struess is hurt. That's usually the guy that starts, but they could put him out there. Reed Shepard, does he come off the bench or does he start? That could be another guy where if he's improved as a second year guy, but he's a backup, he could maybe put up some good numbers. Shaden Sharp, I have no idea because with the Blazers, right, they traded for Drew Holiday, Scoots out. Like, so what do they do in terms of starters, right? Like, because if they're healthy, you just I don't know, but I would think he would be coming off the bench. And that's the funny thing, because like I said, if you look at the Vegas odds, a number of these guys are guys that I kind of assumed. Some of these guys are guys that I would have assumed would just be starters. Like Shaden Sharp, I would have assumed he'd be a starter. Um, John Collins, I would have assumed he would be a starter. Norman Powell, same thing, right? But some of these other guys, like but some of these other guys like Jordan Clarkson's on that list. Obviously, you mentioned Nas Reed, Ty Jerome as well, right? Like, could that be a guy
Yeah.
where with Ja being out, maybe his stats go up, but does he start or not? I'm not sure. Josh Hart, Grady Dick. So there's a lot of strong choices on here, but this one, like you said, is a toss up one where I think it could go in a lot of different directions, and it usually does, right? Because you don't usually have the same guy win six man of the year every year, right? It's been a different person.
Exactly.
So yeah, so moving on, right? I guess to one of the next awards, most improved.
Mm.
This is another one that
Hmm.
I feel like is kind of like a really tricky one just because there's just so many different options. I don't know if this is a zag or not, but I might actually go with Andrew Nemhard
Mm.
on this one just because no Halliburton. We also have seen, I think TJ McConnell just got hurt right in one of their exhibition games. So he might be a guy that might be forced into a bigger offensive role than he did last year, right? Because, last year, in terms of his averages, right, he was what about 10 point? He was like 10 points, 5 assists, 3 rebounds, right? So he's another one of those guys where like stat wise, it doesn't look that impressive relative to what he normally does when you see him play. Dyson Daniels won it last year. So I'm going to go with him just because of the usage should go up. I think the numbers will go up as well because we've seen him in the playoffs. So like when you're asking him to increase his role, he can do it, but he's going to have to do it in the regular season, especially if the Pacers want to win games, and he'll have plenty of opportunities to do so with the ball in his hand. So I'm good. I think there's other strong contenders as well. I could see Denny Avdia winning it. Um, maybe in terms if you're gonna go for another young guy, maybe Reed Shepard, maybe Matas Bucelis, one of those guys could win it. But I'm gonna go with Nemhard.
Yeah, I think that's a great pick. I'm kind of torn on two guys here. Jalen Johnson, I think he could have won it last year,
Yeah.
if he didn't have, the season ending stuff. But I might just have to go with the guy that everybody's probably picking, and it's Amon Thompson. Everybody knows defensively perfect, but offensively has some flaws. So if he can kind of show us the promise of that, maybe get into that 20 points per game, scoring kind of guy, while also, being pretty efficient, outside the arc or at least serviceable. Who knows? I think he could take that one, especially since his role is going to probably dramatically increase and he's going to have the ball in his hands a lot more since there is no true PG that is proven.
Yeah, and that's kind of the case for both of these guys is that because of the circumstances that they're in, they're going to have the ball more. They're going to be forced into a higher usage role, right? And like you said, with no Fred VanVleet for the Rockets, that's going to force Thompson into playing more point, which is kind of what we've seen in the preseason thus far in the games that they've played, right? Where the ball handling duties are kind of shared between a number of guys, but Thompson and Şengün tend to have it the most,
Yeah.
right? And then everybody else kind of fits in and locks into place.
Yes, sir.
So, and like you said, he's another guy where we're all kind of expecting him to have another big year. So he's definitely another one that I could see get it as well. And most of the guys that are getting it, aside from Nemhard, are mostly on the younger side because that's usually what happens.
Yeah.
You don't usually have a vet win most improved. So, coach of the year, this is another one where I think it's somewhat of a toss up because I have a couple of contenders, for it, and it kind of depends on which team you're probably gonna be higher on, right? This one I might zag a little bit, and I think I'm gonna go with Jamal Mosley. The other one is Quinn Snyder, because of the Atlanta Hawks. We know what they did, but just in terms of coach of the year, right? Like they're both in similar spots where they were lower seeds. The records weren't that great, but both of those teams are expected to take a jump. And I think with the additions that the Magic made, assuming that all goes right, I think Mosley is going to be a favorite to win it. But with Quinn Snyder, right, like I think he's a little bit more proven of a coach. So I think you could make the case that with the Hawks, assuming that everything goes right for them, right, healthy Porzingis, healthy Jalen Johnson, and all their other young guys taking a step forward, he could definitely win it as well because everybody knows who he is. But I think he could go either way on this one. I'd say that those are the two favorites to win the award.
Give me Ime Udoka. I think I'm going to go with him. I think that's one that people aren't talking about as much, but say Houston does, take a not necessarily a dramatic leap, but if they look more polished than last year, I think, and say they do, get the number 2 seed again, then I would say for sure that he could possibly win that award, especially, considering that there's a lot of adjustments that are going to need to be made for this team to really, pan out outside of, being looking good on paper, right? There's going to be things that need to be done. How do you manage the rotations? Do you always go big, in your lineups and stuff like that? What do they look like on the floor? So I'm really looking at that team under a microscope.
Yeah, I think that's like you said, that's one that hasn't been discussed as much just because of the fact that, like you said, they were really good last year. They were the 2 seed, and when we see coach of the year in terms of who wins it, like usually it's not given to a team that's got like a relatively mediocre record, right? It's usually given to one of the better teams in the league, not always the best team, right? But it kind of depends on a lot of the different circumstances. Which guy was the guy that won it last year? Was which coach was the one that won it last year?
I can't remember off the top of my head, but coach of the year.
Yeah, I think I'm trying. Let me go back and look. I believe that last year, in terms of, it was Atkinson for the Cavs. He was,
Yeah, you're right.
and that was, yeah, and he was the guy. They didn't have the best record in the league, but he had the best record in the Eastern Conference.
And 2024 was Dagnall, right?
Yeah, that was
Yeah.
Oklahoma City.
Okay.
Before that, it was Mike Brown. So
Yeah.
it's been all over the place, right? Because Atkinson, they had the best record in the East, second best record last year. Before that, Dagnall, they were the 1 seed in the West. Mike Brown, the Kings were the 3 seed, but that one was kind of like the story award, right? Bonnie Williams, Tibbs, Nick Nurse. So there's, so it kind of depends. But I think the Rockets one is a good one if you're still high on their regular season success in terms of wins without Van Vliet, and if you're high on those young guys, that's one of those sleeper dark horse ones, right? I don't
Absolutely.
think he's a favorite, but like you said, there's a pathway to be able to get it. And then moving on, the most useless award, I would say, the weirdest award, the most annoying and irritating one to predict, the clutch player of the year, the Jerry West Trophy. Sorry, I didn't name the other names, but yeah, this one is just such a tough one
Mm-hmm.
to predict because it's almost like you have to pick a team where they're going to be in a lot of close games,
Mm-hmm.
and it's going to have to be a guy who can really turn it on in close games. So this one is a tough one. Obviously, Jalen Brunson won it last year, right? So I'll, I don't even know. I'll go with Jokic because I'm gonna assume that the Nuggets are still gonna be better, but I don't necessarily bank on them just blowing teams out and blowing them away every night. There's still probably gonna be some competitive games, and he's gonna be a big part in it. So I'm gonna pick him. Of course, it's gonna blow up in my face. I know I'm gonna get this one wrong. I don't. I'd have to go back and look at what my previous ones were, but there were, I think one of those, I think the year Steph won it, I think he was like my pick to win it, and I think he ended up getting it. So that was probably the only one that I've gotten. But
Yeah.
the other ones have been very tricky. But I'm gonna go with him. But like I said, this one could literally be anybody.
Yeah, this is by far the worst award for sure. But
Yeah.
I'm gonna go with Ant-Man. Last year,
Okay.
this is actually hilarious because this shows you kind of like how nonsensical this award really is, right? So he led all players with 157 points scored in the clutch last year, right? He's also
hmm
the first player to lead the metric and not win Clutch Player of the Year. Um,
hmm
Brunson pretty much had 1 point less, cool, but he also did it in far fewer games. He, did that in 28 games, whereas Ant-Man, it took him 42 to get to that number. So that's where it's like, okay, what even is the metric for,
Right.
determining, how this award is really given out. So that's, like you said, it is massively weird, but I'm still going to go with Ant-Man here because I think they might be in some pretty close games, and we all know that he normally rises to the occasion.
Yeah, like you said, that's a good point where you mentioned, that he led the league in clutch points, but still didn't get it. And I guess that could probably just be a scenario where, like you said, maybe they looked at Brunson and they're like, well, he did all this and it took him less games to do it. So, and, both guys we know are, guys that tend to show up late in games. So I think Brunson's another guy who could be a strong contender again. The Warriors, if they're, assuming that they're better, Steph could always be in the mix. I mean, like I said, this one, you just never know. Like, by the time we get towards the end of the season, like all the other awards, like there'll be guys where they're kind of obvious favorites, right? Because it hasn't been, because like usually the top ones, the top candidates are like usually the ones where it's like, oh yeah, like it's somewhere on that list, right? Like the year that Steph won it, I think DeRozan was on that list as well, right
Mm-hmm.
along with a couple of guys. So we'll see,
Yeah.
but that one's the trickiest one because I mean MVP is one where it feels like the criteria and the metrics change every year as well. But at least for the most part, like when somebody wins it, you're like, okay, well, like yeah, there's a pretty easy case to make for it. But
Yeah.
although now it's like oftentimes you almost have to try to make the case against the person winning it. But the clutch one is just I don't know, it's just weird.
Yeah.
So,
It's
um, yeah. Any in terms of like maybe a couple of like just Easter egg awards or whatever, like not any awards, but like just kind of just funny questions. Um, say like in terms of like say stat leaders, like do you have a guy in your mind where you're like this guy's gonna lead the league in scoring, or is it probably just gonna be more of the same again?
I was thinking it was either going to be Ant
Mm-hmm.
or Shay,
Mm-hmm.
but I'll go with Ant because that was going to be my logic behind him potentially winning MVP was also him leading the league in scoring. So I'd probably go with that.
Yeah, that's a good one. I'll probably just go with SGA again, but yeah, I think Ant is another one, like you said, that's going to be a really strong contender just because we're assuming he's going to continue to get better.
Mm-hmm.
Right, the Wolves didn't really add any personnel really too much in the offseason. It's just more so some young guys are going to come in, like Dillingham might have the ball a little bit more. But if you've seen him in preseason, right, he's upped his passing and facilitating, so that's kind of cool to see. So maybe that's going to help out Ant, give him another ball handler. If it's funny because if you look at the odds, right, it looks like SGA is the favorite, and then after that, it looks like Giannis, then Luca, then Ant, then Jokic, and then Booker is on that list as well, right? And I guess with Booker, I guess the case is they've lost so much talent that maybe there's a world where he ends up possibly getting it, right? Then you also have Jaylen Brown, right, who's on there as well, presumably because of no Tatum. Embiid's there. He's plus 4,000, which, is not very high odds, but, just I guess the case is if he's healthy, he's usually one of the league leaders in scoring. And then
Yeah.
Cade Cunningham
Okay.
is there as well. So, yeah, and like I said, I'm not going through all those.
Yeah.
I was just kind of just to add some extra things. Did you have any other stats that you might have thought about, like in terms of stats?
Not necessarily. I mean, I think everything's kind of, self-explanatory. Like, okay, how about this? I guess with Halliburton out, who do we think is probably gonna, lead the league in assists?
I'm gonna go with Trae Young.
Figured. Yeah, that's why I'm like they're all very cut and dry. So like blocks would be, Wemby obviously. So I mean, yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, because with Trae Young, he was he was the league leader in assists last year, if I'm
Right.
not mistaken,
Right.
and the roster hasn't really changed. I mean, obviously they've added Porzingis and Nikhil Alexander-Walker, right? But like those are not guys where they're gonna have the ball in their hands a bunch and take the ball out of Trae Young's hands. But I guess at the same time, you also kind of assume, that with a healthy Jalen Johnson, right, that should also kind of maybe take a little bit of Trae Young's usage away,
Mm-hmm.
but he can still get so many assists. And in terms of the other guys, Vegas odds, right, just now looking at them, you also have you got Jokic, who's plus 260. He's the only one that's not like Trae Young's the minus 180, so he's clearly the favorite. Then you got Harden, which I guess the expectation is scoring will probably dip a little bit because they've added more offensive players. Playmaking will still be relatively high. You got Cade, who'll have the ball in his hands, but probably just a little bit lower because Ivy's back. Luca plus 3,300, right? I could see that changing a little bit since LeBron will be out to start the season.
Yeah.
How long he'll be out, we'll see. And then Josh Giddey is the sixth highest one, which is definitely one that's a curveball.
Yeah, I don't like that one.
Yeah. After that, blocks, Wemby, 3-pointers made. Now last year was Ant, right? You assume that Steph is always going to be on that list. He's the favorite to win it, right? Assuming he's healthy. I know last year before the Butler trade, right, his numbers were more up and down just because the team was a lot easier to slow down.
Mm-hmm.
But now with Butler in the other places, like you might expect him to start off better. Does he play enough games? Does he play enough minutes and put up enough shots? What do you think about this one?
Yeah, I'd probably go with Steph on this one. I think that's the safe pick for sure. I don't know if Ant can do that again. I would hope he would.
Yeah, because the thing is now, in the offseason, he mentioned his post-up game and his mid-range game. So
Right.
maybe he might take a few less threes and go into the mid-range, go into the post a little bit more. So maybe his drops a little bit. And then, like I said, with Jimmy Butler out there, maybe Steph's will go back up to where it normally is. So yeah, I'd say he'd be the favorite.
Yeah.
Then steals. Gonna go with Dyson Daniels again. He led the league in steals, right? He had 3 a game last year. So
Yeah.
as long as he's healthy, still impactful, still gonna go with him.
Yep, me too.
Yeah. So yeah, let us know your thoughts on the awards and whether or not you agree or disagree. Because like I said, I feel like a few of them are cut and dry, but I do think that there are some where there's definitely the door is open for somebody to come in and take the award that we're not necessarily expecting. So now going back to preseason, since the last time we've spoken, there have been a few teams, a few players that have played where, like we got kind of like our first look, first preview at seeing a couple of guys. We'll start. The Nuggets and the Clippers played last night. We had already seen the Nuggets play in preseason, but we got to see a little bit of the Clippers, right? Where we got to kind of see, a lot of the guys on the team. Beal was out because I believe he's hurt. And I believe Bogdanovich, he's got a hamstring issue, so I don't even know when he'll be back. But the vast majority of all the other guys played, right? And so they went out there with their starting five was Harden, Kawhi, Zubac, Collins was in there as well, and the fifth starter was Derek Jones Jr. Right, like so it'll be presumably Beal in that group whenever he comes back, right? And in the minutes they played, I mean, they looked pretty solid together, right? I mean, Kawhi looked like his normal self. I mean, he shot 1 for 6 from three. It's one game, so it's very small sample size. But in the minutes they played, right, Harden didn't have to do a whole lot of scoring. He was mainly focusing on playmaking and assisting, right, to Zubac and other guys. If you looked off the bench, Brook Lopez made his debut, looked really strong, 15 points with 3 blocks, spaced the floor. The Clippers now, which we talked about, have a real backup big outside of Zubac now. It's not going to be filling the minutes with either playing really small with guys like Batum or Ben Simmons at center, or guys where they're just not really viable playoff backup centers like a Drew Eubanks, right? Like Brook Lopez is a proven guy. So that was good to see. Chris Paul, he came off the bench as well, right? Didn't really do a ton, played 20 minutes. A little bit of passing, some shot attempts, but like I said, it's so tricky to try to just go off a team off of one game. And the final score, the Nuggets won, but we know like these guys did not play their regular minutes. Like I said, in the minutes when they were all out there, both teams played pretty much even. Um, Over on the Nugget side, right? You got Jokic putting up, 12, 9, and 6. Aaron Gordon was their leader in points. You saw Cam Johnson out there, right? He had 8 points, 3 steals, 2 for 7 from three, and that's definitely something that's going to be different from Porter Jr. Is he had 0 rebounds in the game, and we know Porter Jr. when he wants to be, right, is a better rebounder than Cam Johnson. He's bigger, a little bit more athletic, but you can also see offensively just, being able to move without the ball, making the extra read. So I'm curious to see what that looks like. We got a little bit of a taste of the Nuggets bench as well, right? We saw Bruce Brown, we saw Peyton Watson, we saw Tim Hardaway Jr. A lot of guys that didn't play very well or in terms of shot making. But, both teams looked really good. I'm curious to see what the Clippers look like with Beal in that starting five, because then you're not going to have a designated guy that's just out there to be your primary stopper. It's probably just going to kind of be defend by committee, right? Like, because Derek Jones Jr., he's not a guy that you're expected to run a bunch of plays for or, give a lot of touches to. He's just out there to play his role, defend guys, crash the boards, catch lobs. And that's kind of different from Beal, right? Chris Dunn, right, was starting and now he's coming off the bench. So I'm curious to see how they kind of manage these lineups in terms of getting these defensive guys in there. But they've also added more offensive oriented guys, so including guys with a little bit more size. So that should help, balance out the roster as well. So I'd say mostly positives. But what did you think?
Yeah, I mean, I just saw a lot of well-roundedness, I think, from both teams, whereas, last year the Clippers were definitely more defensive heavy, and I think, offensively, they should be able to open up the playbook when you bring in a guy like Bradley Beal, because, what he can bring, off the spot up and just shot creation in general. So defensively, I think is where you do have some questions about them, when Beal is inserted, like you were talking about, because then you don't really have that lockdown guy, versus last year. But, with the Nuggets, it was good to see, they're pretty much their entire bench, right, play. Valanciunas looks solid. The other guys, I think once everybody gets their feet wet and the season really starts, I think, the Nuggets will look much, much, much better. But overall, I think, you're just giving Jokic more weapons, more guys that can cut, smarter players as well. Like, I think Cam Johnson, yeah, the numbers probably aren't going to look as good as, Michael Porter Jr. from a box score perspective. But I think if you watch the games, you're going to feel the impact of Cam Johnson and what he brings, from an IQ standpoint.
Yeah. And, even a couple of the guys off the bench like Peyton Watson has been relatively consistent so
Yeah.
far in preseason. where he's kind of finding ways, to impact the game. Because we know defensively, right, he's pretty good. Just the issue had been on the offensive end, but he's found ways to move off the ball and, kind of get into these spots in terms of cutting. Like, he's not taking a ton of threes, but the 3-point shots, overall are relatively solid. So, and that's going to be the key for him. Day'Ron Holmes, like I said, we've continued to see some of him. He didn't play quite as much in this game, but that's just another guy where, like, that's another athletic big guy that you can bring off the bench, and he can even space the floor. So just having a lot more options to work with, like he said, and like I said, I think is going to be where the Nuggets are going to be able to have some really good spots this season.
Yeah.
After that, we finally got to see the Wizards make their debut in the preseason.
Boy.
One game. Obviously, you're the Wizards guy. This is your team. So, what did you think in terms of what you saw out there from all these guys? Because there were a couple of guys that I felt like that in terms of like some of the guys who were already there. There were some guys that I thought like had some good stretches, but I want you to kind of mostly talk about what you saw.
Yeah. Right. I think we should start with, I don't want to say the elephant in the room, but the vets. They look good. They don't necessarily look completely washed, right? CJ McCollum, Chris Middleton, I think they're going to have a very positive impact on the season. Granted, is it going to translate to wins? No, I think it's going to be more of a, this is how you guys should operate in the league. This is how you carry yourself and, longevity, right? Cool. That's great for the young guys. Speaking of the young guys, Sarr, he looked good. Right. Offensively, very efficient. That was something that we didn't really see a lot of last year. It was a lot of inefficiencies, especially around the rim. And obviously defensively, he did his thing as well in 17 minutes played. The other guys like Bub, Keyshawn George, it was kind of rough. They had very rough outings, I would say, especially Bub. I think that was the glaring issue where he might not necessarily be ready to take the reins of, full-time starting point guard or two guard, whatever in the league. We'll see. It's one game. Don't want to, judge a guy for one game, but I think Keyshawn George continues to be a Swiss Army knife, and that guy, I'm telling you, I feel like he can shoot, but I think the volume is kind of what throws his stats off. Maybe I'm just tripping and coping, but. He had a rough shooting night, but did everything else, I think, fairly well, especially on the defensive end.
4 blocks.
Yeah, exactly. And then you had Cam Whitmore. I think he kind of low-key stole the show as well because, you look at him, and I'm not going to say it's a lot of pressure, but I feel like, this is kind of a prove-it year for him, right? Like, you fell out of favor in Houston, and now you're in Washington where you supposedly will have the green light, and I think offensively, he did his thing out there. It's just, can he do other things, other than score? So I'm curious to see, what that looks like, down the road. But it was nice to see Wizards basketball. I just don't know why our first game was literally yesterday.
Yeah. What'd you think of the rookies? Because, I know Trey Johnson, Will Riley, right? Those guys came off the bench. And didn't quite play. I don't think, and Trey Johnson played like 23 minutes or so. But what'd you think of those guys, right? Because those are the guys that the Wizards took this year, and they're kind of viewed as future pieces. I don't know how Riley will play this year, but Johnson obviously he was the their top pick in the draft, and he's a guy that at some point will probably move into that starting 5. But what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, Trey Johnson, I think he's good. I like the fact that he crashed the boards. That was something that I kind of liked, right, in terms of that. I thought he was probably going to have more of a one-dimensional scoring kind of game, but I felt like it was a little bit more well-rounded than expected. Definitely didn't have, the wow factor of, this guy dropped an efficient 20 points. I mean, he got to his spots. I would have liked to have seen him shoot more 3 balls, if I'm going to be honest, because I think that's a huge part of his game. But solid debut, not the worst one that I've ever seen by far, but I am expecting more from him as the season goes on. And maybe it's because he wasn't really in the starting lineup and, look around, look at who he was playing with. And in those lineups, it wasn't necessarily the greatest. So there's that. Will Riley, I think that's a guy where I'm 50-50 on him because we doubled down on our identity a lot. Like, I feel like we have the Keyshawn George, we have, even Jameer Watkins, right? Now Cam Whitmore and Will Riley. Like, that's a lot of guard wing guys that I don't necessarily know what they look like, right? And like Bilal too, didn't even mention him. So where does Will Riley factor into this whole situation? So I am kind of curious about that. But I think he has a serviceable, well-rounded game that I'm sure will provide him minutes in the rotation. But it's gonna probably be doing the little things for him. Same thing with Jameer Watkins.
Yeah, and that's going to be, kind of the key is that, when because you mentioned before, because you were talking about Bub, right, as the point guard, and that's kind of one of the benefits, I guess, of even though he's not like a true natural point guard, that's kind of one of the benefits of bringing in guys like McCollum and Middleton is because those guys have experience playing with the ball in their hands, even playing in the pick and roll. With the ball in their hands, either looking to score or to pass, right? Because Middleton played with next to Giannis, and obviously McCollum's played alongside a bunch of different guys, right, including Dame, as well as some other bigs, as well as other guys like Ingram and Zion. But that's kind of one of the cool benefits of having those type of guys is that should help a guy like an Alex Sarr, right? Because we talked about like last year, like they didn't really have anybody like in that group, right, where you're kind of looking at them as like, oh yeah, that's a guy that is pretty consistently able to make good reads as a passer. I guess Poole had experience doing that, right? But he's also another score first guy. So now
Absolutely.
you have two of those guys, and these guys are vets, right? Who are kind of at the point of their careers where it's a different point, right? Where they've already made their money, they know their role, and that should help some of these guys, like I said, because we talked about Sarr, where yeah, he's got a lot of upside, especially on the defensive end, right? But offensively, he's a work in progress, right? But with guys like this should help, maybe kind of facilitate that offensive
Absolutely.
growth,
I
because
agree.
that's kind of where what you're looking for with a guy like that is like, how can we make it easier for him, in terms of like some of his weaknesses. Obviously, some of that stuff is just going to have to develop, but that should be the hope is that is that they can help some of these guys while they're on the team. Maybe they don't stay the whole time. Who knows? Maybe they get traded, or maybe they do stay the whole time. But that's the benefit of having a couple of vets on this team. And I am curious to see where everything else goes from here, right? Because this is a team that I think a lot of people have their eyes on in terms of a lot of the young players, and we haven't even seen all of them, right? Because Bilal's hurt, and at some point he'll be back. And I'm curious to see what that group looks like,
Yeah.
with all those guys in place.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah. Any other teams or players uh, that you want to mention or shout out at all?
Um, we kind of got a good look at the Celtics. I know, you
Hmm.
know, it was interesting, to
Yeah.
see, certain guys out there, right? Like,
Go ahead.
yeah,
Mhm.
I mean, like Simons. I think that's
Right.
that's a guy that I think people were looking at and showed a little bit of mini Dame, tendencies, right? Just pretty much shot a bunch of threes, had some other shots as well. But I think he's going to be a refreshing take on, what their 3-point scoring is going to look like. He's going to double down on their identity, which is something that people aren't really talking about. So I expect, him to have I'm not going to say like a career year, but I think this season is probably going to put him on the radar of a lot of people that probably didn't know about his game like that.
Yeah.
Not saying he's going to break out or anything, but I think he'll fit well in the system, better than people forecast.
Yeah. And to be honest, there's a world where maybe Pritchard starts and then Simons is the guy off the bench and he could be six man of the year,
Very
right?
true.
Because offensively, he's going to be able to fit in, as you mentioned, put up a ton of threes, and that's what the Celtics want to do. That's Missoula ball to a T, and he's going to be able to go in there and play his game. And if he plays really well, I'm curious to see what happens, right? Because most people, by and large, have looked at him as a trade chip, and he could just be one of those guys where maybe they like him and keep him long term, or maybe they, based off of how he plays, maybe they're just able to flip him, right? A couple of their other guys, right? Like Luca Garza has come out there. He's actually played pretty well, been pretty productive for them. I'm curious to see how it translates into the regular season, as well as Josh Minot, right? So both of the Wolves guys that they picked up so far have played pretty consistently well for them in the preseason. So I'm curious to see, just what it all looks like once they actually start playing real games, right?
Yeah.
Because I think, because there are people who are higher on this team, I think, than us, because we're not quite as high on them, but there are a lot of people who think, especially if Tatum comes back, that maybe there's a world where they're actually a little bit better than some people think. I'd still need to see what those guys look like in a normal regular season environment. Just because I don't think you can just automatically just bank on those type of guys playing great every night. But at the very least, like they have an identity, they have a system, even without Tatum, right? So I mean, there's a world, but I am curious to see what those guys look like. And like you said, it's good that we've been able to see it. Because they played the Cavs the other night, or what was left of the Cavs, because they didn't play any of their starters.
Yeah.
Um, did we ever mention Tyrese Proctor? I know he didn't play as well in this game, but he was a guy that in some of the preseason games has honestly looked, pretty solid. I don't know how much he'll play,
Yeah.
but with Garland out, there's minutes available at the point guard spot, and he won't start, but he could just be a guy that might be able to come in and play spot minutes, right? Because Lonzo will probably get a decent amount of those, but he's also not a guy you can automatically just rely on durability wise. So
Yeah, Proctor's been solid. Definitely,
mhm.
one of those guys where I think, he could be a spark plug for them and a do it all kind of guy. It gives me good vibes, in terms of seeing that from him because um yeah, coming off of the Duke season, I think the the tournament performance kind of just tanked his stock a little bit because I feel like he probably could have been a first rounder if he didn't have those ugly performances, especially with the free throws. But yeah, the guy I think is a serviceable sharpshooter, and then it kind of is on him to make the rest shake, right?
Yeah. Another team that I've kind of, as I've looked at them more and more, I know they didn't play their guys too much in the last game. I actually kind of liked what I've seen from the Raptors, right? Just overall, just kind of watching them and just kind of seeing like how they actually fit all those guys. Ingram's been really good in the games that he's played, right? Quickly's back. He's, been playing well, right? Like RJ Barrett, like they've had stretches where they figured it out. Barnes, his numbers like have been kind of strange, right? Where he's not really scoring a ton,
Yeah.
right? Or making a lot of shots. He's doing other things like he's rebounding, he's assisting and defending, but it's been kind of a strange preseason for him individually. But overall, like the Raptors have looked relatively solid, and this was kind of a team. I think we picked the over on them, and this was a team where, yeah, like the best version of this team is a team that in this version of the East can make the playoffs, right? It's just a matter of, can they fit all these pieces together where on paper they don't really feel like great fits alongside one another. But for what it's worth, right? Like in the games that I've seen Brandon Ingram play, like he's made it. He's made an effort to, like the ball's in his hands a decent amount. But he's also hitting from three. Also playing another facilitator role. And that's kind of the nice thing about a guy like Quickly, where he's not like a high usage guard. He can kind of fit in really well with what they want to do. So I think these pieces can fit. I don't know how great it's going to be, but I've actually liked kind of seeing them
Yeah,
thus
me
far.
too. And you add in Colin Murray Boyles, he's been serviceable on both ends of the floor. So, you have another young guy as well. And yeah, I think the Raptors are, yeah, they're a fun team to watch. And they hit freaking back to back game winners. It's wild.
Yeah, exactly. Couple other notes, just kind of mentioning them. Like the Suns and the Nets have been playing in China, so their games, have been, or they had a couple of games where they were very early in the day, so you probably wouldn't have caught them. On the East Coast, they were like 6 a.m. outings. But in terms of, like I said, what I've seen, we've already talked about, some of the Nets guards, right, where they honestly have looked relatively decent. The Phoenix Suns, what have you seen from some of these guys? Because we haven't seen Mark Williams out there for the most part, but we've seen kind of a lot of the other supporting pieces. I guess Oso Iguodala's been kind of the main big that's been starting and playing a lot. But what have you seen from Malawach? Because he's kind of a man of mystery in this draft, right? Because he was drafted by the Suns, and a lot of people were very high on him. But but you kind of looked at him as a project. But with Mark Williams not playing as much, he's actually played kind of the role of, I guess, like third big, right? Because then you also have Nick Richards out there. But what have you thought about him in the minutes that you've seen, if anything?
Hard to figure out. Um,
Right.
I think his interior presence is solid. I'd like him to get better touch, but is he going to be a stretch or not? That's what I don't understand. Can he shoot or not? I need to see that. And I guess it would take probably a full season for us to figure that out. But defensively, I mean, he seems okay. It's not like he gets dog walked in the paint or anything like that. And I feel like we're probably going to have to revisit this pick in a couple of years. I'm probably not expecting too many
Right.
crazy things from his rookie year. Maybe, down the line when, some contracts expire and, there's some retooling around, maybe he can be not necessarily the franchise big, but, a solid rim protector. And if he can add a 3-point, game to his bag, then I think he could absolutely be one of the premier bigs in the league.
Yeah. And then just kind of another random, not random, but like just another, just kind of question. Kaminga, the point forward,
Oh,
he's been
God.
averaging 4 assists a game in 18 minutes a game. Mostly off the bench. The last couple of games he started, but he's not necessarily dominating the offense maybe the way that you might have thought that he wouldn't, just based off of what's been going on. So what have you thought of his play so far in the preseason? If I don't know if you've seen like a ton of him, because not all of his games have been on national TV and whatnot. But what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I've seen some of his stuff here and there. I mean, it's good that he's out there. I think it's good that he's, being attentive. It's good that he's rebounding. He is playmaking. Maybe he's just, being playing good soldier here, but I don't know. Offensively, it doesn't seem like they're really drawing too much up for him, but he's making the right reads, right? And I think, there is a little bit of a level of effort that I don't think we saw previously.
Yeah. So, any other names or what do you think?
No, I've been pretty impressed with everybody that I've seen. So
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And let us know your thoughts in the comments on some of these other preseason guys. If you want to check out our thoughts on many of the other top preseason guys, right, that we talked about that in the previous episode as well. So, now preseason's almost over, so we're pretty much about a week away before the start of the regular season. So, there's going to be a lot to look forward to, and of course, we're going to continue to talk about that more as we get closer. So now we'll close it out like we normally do, with a little bit of polling. So, in our last one, right, our last post, we talked about the question of LeBron and the Lakers, right? And we asked the question of, will the Lakers be able to stay afloat without LeBron, right? And then in terms of what we got 67% of respondents that said yes. So it seems like most people, by and large, feel like they're going to be okay, right? And we
yeah,
mentioned that their schedule isn't overly difficult through the first stretch of games. There are some tough teams that they play, but it's going to be interesting, right? Because Luka has not played a preseason game yet. They have a few preseason games left. He's supposed to play in two, at least probably two of them. They have a back to back for whatever bizarre reason. But there is a feeling that in terms of some of these guys, like people like Vanderbilt has looked really strong. Ayton has looked better each and every game. But obviously Luka and Austin can piece it together. Austin's looked very good in preseason, but there's a feeling from a lot of people, I think ourselves included, that feel like they can stay afloat, but it's going to be different and it's going to be a little bit tougher because people mention that the year the Mavs went to the finals, right? Like Kyrie missed a decent amount of time, and they had a lot of injuries as a whole. This is a very different team from that Mavs team, right? Because especially when you look at this team, this is not like necessarily a defensive-minded team either, right? There's not like a ton of athletes, but the thought process is there's a little bit more balance, right? And with Luka out there, he's going to have the ball in his hands a lot. So you're not going to see as many possessions where it's Jake LaRavia trying to create off the dribble, or some of these other guys, right? But even like a Gabe Vincent, right? Like he's been forced into having the ball a little bit more, a little bit higher usage, right? Where he kind of is looking more like the Miami Heat,
yeah,
Gabe Vincent. But yeah, I think we're both kind of in the camp that like, yeah, like they need LeBron obviously if they want to be the best versions of themselves. But early on they might be okay, and last for a little bit, assuming you get in shape, all out Luca and everything else, in between.
yeah. I would agree with you. I think they're going to be okay.
Yeah. So, so that pretty much concludes today's episode of Off Ball Takes. Again, let us know your thoughts in the comments on our awards, whether or not you agree with them, what you've seen from preseason thus far. Of course, if you want to join in on polls, always go to @the OBT podcast. You can also leave a comment and we'll read it. And don't forget to like and subscribe as well to help the channel grow. So we appreciate all the support. We'll see you next episode.